I was halfway through reviewing quarterly reports at my desk when my phone lit up with my husband's name. Daniel. He'd been away for 3 days at a corporate training conference in Phoenix. I glanced at the clock, almost 7 in the evening, and smiled to myself, assuming he was calling to complain about hotel coffee or tell me about some boring keynote speaker. We'd always done that. Even when life got busy, we still checked in. Or at least, I thought we did. I answered on the second ring. "Hey," I said lightly, "how's Phoenix treating you?" There was silence. Not the comfortable kind we'd shared for 6 years of marriage. This one was heavy, like something unsaid pressing against my chest. I heard muffled sounds in the background, an elevator ding, distant voices, the hum of a hotel corridor. Then he said it. "We need to talk." My hand tightened around the pen I was holding. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling, already feeling my stomach drop. "Okay," I said. "Go ahead." Another pause, longer this time. "I met someone," he finally said. The words didn't register at first. I actually waited for him to laugh, to clarify, to say he meant a colleague or a new client. When he didn't, I asked him to explain. He told me he'd met her at the conference, a woman. They'd been talking a lot, spending time together, getting close. Getting close how? I asked, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. "It's complicated," he said quickly. "It's more of a situationship." A situationship? I almost laughed at the absurdity of that word. Here I was, under the impression that I was a married woman, vows, rings, shared accounts, 6 years of history, and apparently I was actually part of some undefined gray area, flexible enough to make room for a 3-day conference romance. I stood up and walked to the window, watching people pass by on the street below. Complete strangers, living normal lives, completely unaware that my marriage was unraveling in real time over a phone call. "So let me understand this," I said slowly. "You met another woman 3 days ago, and now you're exploring something with her, while you're still married to me." He corrected me gently. "It wasn't a relationship," he said. "It was fluid. They were just seeing where things might lead." Fluid. Exploring. Words that belonged in a self-help book, not in a conversation with the woman who had believed in forever. When he said he still loved me, that this didn't change that, I didn't respond. I hung up. And in that moment, sitting alone in our house, I realized my life was about to change in ways I hadn't yet begun to imagine. Before that phone call, my life looked ordinary in the quiet, dependable way I'd always believed was the point. I was 34 years old. I worked in corporate finance, the kind of job that revolved around deadlines, reports, and calendars that never quite stopped filling themselves. I wasn't flashy. I wasn't reckless. I liked structure, plans, and promises that meant something. Daniel used to say that was one of the things he loved about me, that I made life feel stable. We met 8 years ago at a friend's housewarming party. I'd gone out of obligation, fully planning to leave early. He was standing in the kitchen, arguing with someone about whether pineapple belonged on pizza. I laughed before I could stop myself. He turned, smiled, and just like that, we were talking. Daniel was charming in a relaxed way, not loud, not performative. He listened. He asked questions. When he texted me the next day, it wasn't a lazy hey, but a thoughtful follow-up about something I'd mentioned in passing. I told myself that kind of attention mattered. We dated for 2 years before he proposed. He bought the ring himself, something classic, nothing extravagant, and proposed on a quiet weekend trip. No audience, no spectacle, just us. I said yes without hesitation. At the time, it felt like the easiest decision I'd ever made. The early years of our marriage were good. Not movie perfect, but real. We built routines together. Sunday grocery runs, shared playlists on long drives, late-night takeout eaten straight from the container when neither of us felt like cooking. I handled most of the household organization. He handled fixing things when they broke. We argued occasionally, usually about work stress or money timing, but nothing that felt unmanageable. Looking back, I can see the small shifts, the kind you ignore because they don't arrive all at once. He started traveling more for work, conferences, trainings, networking events. At first, I missed him. Then I adjusted. Then I stopped expecting long calls and settled for brief check-ins. "Busy day," he'd say. "Exhausted." I believed him. We spent less time talking about things that mattered, not because we were fighting, but because it felt easier not to push. I told myself this was what long-term relationships look like: comfortable, predictable, safe. His family liked me well enough. His mother had opinions about how often I visited, how I folded towels, how I should prioritize family. But I'd learned to smile and let it pass. Daniel rarely intervened. He preferred harmony, even when it came at my expense. There were moments I remember now with uncomfortable clarity. The way he'd started guarding his phone more carefully. The way he'd seemed distracted when I talked about my day. The nights he came home late and said he'd lost track of time. None of it screamed betrayal. It whispered disengagement. And I ignored it. I told myself marriages went through phases. That love didn't always feel electric. That commitment was about staying, not questioning every quiet moment. I never imagined that while I was trying to preserve what we had, he was already imagining alternatives. The day before he left for Phoenix, I kissed him goodbye at the door, told him to call when he landed. He smiled, promised he would. He didn't. I didn't think much of it at the time. That was my mistake. Because while I was here, managing our life, believing in us, Daniel was discovering just how easily he could step outside it and convince himself it wasn't really betrayal if he gave it a softer name. After I hung up on Daniel, I didn't immediately cry. That surprised me. I just stood there, one hand still resting on the window frame, staring down at the street, like the answer might be walking past in someone else's ordinary life. My heart was pounding, but my body felt strangely cold, as if it had decided to conserve energy for whatever was coming next. The word situationship kept looping in my head, like a bad song you can't turn off. I walked back to my desk and looked at the open report on my screen. Numbers, graphs, forecasts, everything neat and contained, everything predictable. And suddenly, that predictability felt insulting, because nothing in my marriage had been predictable at all. My phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. I didn't want to drop this on you like that. I needed you to know. I'm sorry. I stared at the screen so long the brightness dimmed. Then another buzz. We can talk when I get home tomorrow. Please don't do anything drastic tonight. Drastic. As if what he'd done was just an uncomfortable conversation, not a bomb he'd tossed into the center of our lives. I typed, okay, deleted it. Typed, we'll talk tomorrow. Deleted that too. In the end, I sent something short and neutral. We'll talk when you're home. Even as I pressed send, I felt disgusted with myself for sounding like I was cooperating. But here's the truth I didn't want to admit. Part of me still wanted to believe there was some explanation that made this less horrifying. That maybe I'd misunderstood. That maybe he was exaggerating because he was confused and tired and away from home. That part of me was clinging to the man I thought I'd married. And that's exactly why the seeds of conflict had been planted months ago. Because I'd been training myself to accept less and call it maturity. When I replay the past year, I see how it happened. Daniel stopped asking questions about me. When I talked about work, he nodded, but his eyes drifted, like he was watching a different life behind my words. When I suggested weekend plans, he said he was tired. When I tried to initiate intimacy, he often kissed my forehead and promised later, like affection was another task to schedule. At first, I blamed stress. His job had gotten more demanding. He'd been angling for a promotion. He talked about leadership opportunities the way people talk about salvation. But stress doesn't explain everything. Stress doesn't explain the way he'd started dressing differently for trips. More deliberate, more cologne. Stress doesn't explain how his phone always seemed angled away from me, screen down, face hidden like a secret. Stress doesn't explain the way he sometimes smiled at messages and then looked up at me too quickly, as if catching himself. There had been moments, small, sharp moments, when I'd felt that instinctual tug of suspicion. Once I was folding laundry and picked up his jacket. His phone slipped from the pocket and lit up as it hit the bed. I wasn't trying to snoop, but my eyes landed on the notification before I could stop them. A woman's name. A heart emoji. He snatched the phone so fast it was almost comical. Work, he said too quickly. Just a colleague. I wanted to ask why a colleague needed heart emojis, but I didn't. I swallowed it. Because asking would mean admitting I didn't trust him. And I had spent years convincing myself that trust was something you performed until it became real again. Another time, his mother made a comment at dinner. Casual, almost careless. You know, she said, cutting into her chicken, a man like Daniel needs admiration. He needs to feel like his efforts are noticed. The way she said it made my stomach tighten, like it wasn't advice, but a warning. Daniel didn't look at me. He just kept eating. Later, in the car, I said lightly, Your mom really thinks you need worship, huh? He smiled without humor. She just means people want to feel valued. I remember glancing at him, waiting for him to say, I feel valued by you. He didn't. That silence was another seed. Then there was the Phoenix trip. He told me about it like it was nothing. 3-day training, he said. A bunch of sessions, networking, you know the drill. I asked if spouses were invited. He laughed. God, no, it's not that kind of event. Not that kind of event. The day he left, he hugged me longer than usual. Not warmly, more like someone trying to memorize something before walking away. I remember thinking it was sweet. I remember thinking it meant he missed me already. Now I wonder if that hug was guilt. After the call, I moved through the house like I didn't recognize it. The living room where we'd watched shows together. The kitchen where I'd made his favorite meals. The hallway where our wedding photo sat on the shelf like a quiet accusation. I stopped in front of that photo. 2 people smiling, pressed close, eyes bright with belief. I touched the frame with my fingertips, almost like I could feel the past through glass. Then my phone buzzed again. Another message from Daniel. I love you, I really do. Please don't shut me out. My throat tightened. Because what he was asking wasn't don't shut me out. What he was really asking was, stay available while I decide if someone else is better. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not rage, not hysteria, just clarity. I took a slow breath and walked to the spare room where we kept our paperwork. Tax documents, insurance, bank statements, all the boring scaffolding of a shared life. I pulled the folder labeled Accounts and sat on the floor like a woman preparing for surgery. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet, but I knew this. Whatever came next, I wasn't going to be the woman waiting politely while her husband explored fluid connections. I was going to understand what I was dealing with, fully, and I was going to protect myself. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on my side of the bed, staring at the ceiling fan as it turned in slow, uneven circles, every rotation counting down to something I couldn't yet name. My body was exhausted, but my mind refused to shut off. Every time I closed my eyes, Daniel's voice replayed in my head. Situationship, fluid, exploring. Words that felt slippery, designed to escape accountability. Around 2 a.m, I got up. The house was silent in that way only nighttime silence can be. Thick, almost watchful. I padded into the kitchen, poured a glass of water I didn't drink, then sat at the table where we'd eaten dinner just days ago, talking about nothing important. I remember thinking how cruel timing could be, how normal everything had felt while something this destructive was already unfolding. That was when my phone lit up again. A text from Daniel. I can't sleep either. I hate that you're hurting. This is hard for me too. Hard for him. I stared at the message, my jaw tightening. I could feel my pulse in my ears, the slow, deliberate thud of a body bracing itself. I typed before I could stop myself. Hard how? The reply came almost instantly. Being honest like this isn't easy. I didn't plan for feelings to happen. They just did. There it was again. That passive framing. As if feelings were weather patterns and not choices layered on top of opportunity. I wrote back. So you didn't plan to spend time with her? Talk to her? Get close? Several minutes passed. Long enough that I imagined him pacing a hotel room, phone in hand, deciding which version of the truth to offer. I didn't think it would go this far. That sentence landed like a crack spreading through glass. I felt something snap. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with a sharp internal click, the sound of a boundary finally breaking. My hands were steady when I typed this time. Daniel, you're married to me. What exactly did you think this far was? No response. I stood up, walked into the living room, and sat on the couch facing the shelf with our wedding photo. The woman in that picture looked certain, safe, loved. I wasn't her anymore. At 6:30 in the morning, I called in sick to work. My voice sounded calm as I did it, which felt surreal given that my marriage was actively collapsing. But I needed the day. I needed space to think without pretending everything was fine. By 9, I was sitting in the office of a divorce attorney named Robert Hayes. I hadn't planned it ahead of time. I hadn't threatened it. I hadn't even said the word divorce out loud yet. But after hours of lying awake, one thing had become painfully clear. I needed to understand my options before Daniel got home and tried to reframe everything in person. Robert was in his late 50s, with kind eyes, and the sort of neutral tone that comes from having seen every version of betrayal imaginable. He reviewed the notes I'd scribbled down, timeline, confession, the word situationship written and underlined twice. He looked up at me. So he admitted to emotional involvement with another woman. Yes, I said. And he's still with her. He said he needs time to see where it might lead. Robert nodded slowly. People like to use modern language to soften traditional behavior. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. That's what it felt like, I said. Like he was rebranding cheating. Infidelity is infidelity, Robert said calmly. What someone calls it doesn't change the legal or emotional reality. He explained my options without dramatizing them. Because Daniel had confessed voluntarily, no denial, no ambiguity. The process could move quickly if I wanted it to. Papers could be drafted within 24 hours. Are you sure? He asked gently. This is a big decision. I thought of Daniel's texts, his careful phrasing, his insistence that I not do anything drastic while he explored a relationship with another woman. He made his decision 3 days ago, I said quietly. I'm just responding to it. By the time I left Robert's office, I had a signed retainer agreement and a strange sense of calm settling into my chest. Not happiness, not relief, resolve. My next stop was the bank. I opened a separate account in my own name and transferred enough to cover immediate expenses. Everything documented, everything clean. I wasn't hiding assets or playing games. I was preparing for the reality Daniel had already created. On the drive home, my phone buzzed again. I'll be home tomorrow evening, Daniel wrote. We'll talk then. We'll figure this out. Will, as if this were still a shared problem. When I got home, I walked through the house with different eyes. Not as a wife waiting to reconcile, but as a woman deciding what stayed and what didn't. I pulled the suitcase down from the closet, changed the sheets in the guest room, made a quiet mental list of what belonged to him. That afternoon, necessity, pushed me to open his social media profiles. And there she was. In multiple photos from the conference, standing too close, his hand resting on her lower back like it belonged there. Comments from colleagues filled with heart emojis and you two look adorable. I took screenshots of everything, not because I needed proof anymore, but because seeing it erased the last thread of doubt. This wasn't confusion. This was choice. By the time evening settled in, I had moving boxes ordered for next day delivery, a clear timeline from my attorney, and a plan forming with chilling precision. Daniel texted again around 10. I miss you. I can't wait to be home. I set the phone face down. Tomorrow, he would come home expecting a conversation. What he would get instead was the consequence of calling his wife to announce a situationship and assuming she would wait patiently for him to decide her worth. The next day unfolded with an almost eerie sense of order. I woke up early, not because I was rested, but because my body had shifted into something like survival mode. Every movement felt deliberate, purposeful, as if my mind had handed control to a quieter, steadier version of myself. At 7:30, my phone buzzed. Morning, I'll text when I land. I didn't reply. Instead, I brewed coffee and stood at the counter, watching steam rise from the mug. My hands were steady. That scared me more than shaking would have. I'd always thought heartbreak came with chaos, tears, yelling, impulsive decisions. What I was experiencing felt colder, clearer. By mid-morning, I'd gone through our joint accounts again. Credit cards, streaming services, insurance policies, so many small connections you don't notice while things are good. Marriage, I realized, is less about romance and more about infrastructure. Untangling it requires precision. Around noon, the moving boxes arrived. Seeing them stacked by the door made everything real in a way paperwork never could. Cardboard has a finality to it. I started with the obvious things: his clothes, shoes, work bag. Each item I placed in a box felt like crossing something off a list I never wanted to make. As I worked, memories surfaced uninvited. That sweater he loved, because I once told him it made his eyes look warmer. The watch I'd bought him for our 5th anniversary. I paused with that one in my hand longer than I meant to. Then I set it gently in the box labeled Daniel, Office. This wasn't about punishment. It was about separation. My phone buzzed intermittently throughout the day. Messages from him about conference sessions, airport delays, photos of meals he claimed were terrible. Attempts at normalcies layered over betrayal. Like if he kept the rhythm familiar enough, I'd forget what he'd told me. I replied just enough to avoid suspicion. Sounds busy. Safe flight. Talk later. Each message tasted like ash. Around 3, I called my friend Melissa. She answered on the second ring, cheerful. Hey, stranger. Everything okay? I took a breath. I need a favor. Her tone shifted instantly. What's going on? Can you come by this evening? I asked. I might need help moving some boxes. Moving boxes? She repeated. Are you and Daniel moving? Not exactly, I said. I'll explain when you get here. She didn't press. She just said she'd be there by 5. By late afternoon, most of his belongings were neatly packed and stacked by the front door. His suitcase sat on top, zipped and ready. The guest room bed was made, clean and untouched, like a space I'd prepared for a stranger rather than the man I'd married. At 4 o'clock, Robert called. "The papers are ready," he said. "You can pick them up any time before 6. "I'll be there," I said. Driving to his office felt surreal, like I was moving through someone else's life. I read every page carefully. Petition for dissolution of marriage, financial disclosures, temporary restrictions on joint accounts. Clean, thorough, final. "Are you sure?" Robert asked again as I signed. "He made his choice," I said. "I'm just making mine official." When I got home, Melissa was already there, standing in the doorway, eyes widening as she took in the boxes. "Oh my God," she said softly. "What happened?" I told her everything. The call, the conference, the situationship. She went very still. "He said that out loud? To you?" "Yes." She shook her head slowly. "I'm so sorry. That's unforgivable." We worked in silence for a while, moving boxes, adjusting furniture to fill the empty spaces. She didn't ask me if I was okay. She knew better. The question implied uncertainty, and I didn't feel uncertain. At 8, my phone buzzed again. "Just landed. Be home in about an hour." I looked around the house. It felt different. Not empty, but edited. Like I'd removed something that no longer belonged. Melissa hugged me before she left. "Call me if you need anything," she said. "Anything." "I will," I promised. At 9:15, headlights swept across the front window. I sat at the kitchen table with the divorce papers laid out in front of me, my hands folded calmly on top. I listened as Daniel tried his key. Once, twice. Then the knock. When I opened the door, he smiled automatically, travel-worn but familiar. "Hey," he said. "My key isn't working. Did something happen with the lock?" I stepped aside. His gaze followed mine to the boxes by the door. The smile drained from his face as his eyes flicked to the papers on the table. "What's this?" he asked. "That," I said evenly, "is your things." He walked toward the table, picked up the top page, and read the title aloud. "Petition for dissolution of marriage." His hands shook. "You filed for divorce?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Yesterday," I said. "Right after you told me about your situationship." He looked at me like I'd slapped him. "But I said we needed to talk," he said. "Figure this out together." I met his eyes. "You figured it out in Phoenix," I said quietly. "I just caught up." Daniel sat down slowly, like his legs had forgotten how to hold him. "This isn't what I wanted," he said, rubbing his hands together. "You're moving too fast." I stayed where I was, standing across from him, the kitchen table between us like a line neither of us could cross anymore. "You called me from another state to tell me you were emotionally involved with another woman," I said. "What pace did you expect me to move at?" "That's not what I meant," he said quickly. It wasn't like that." I tilted my head. "Then explain it to me. Slowly, in simple terms." He opened his mouth, closed it, then sighed. "I thought you'd be more understanding." The word landed hard. "Understanding of what?" I asked. "That you met someone and decided our marriage was optional?" He looked down at the papers again. "I was trying to be honest with you." "Honest would have been talking to me before you started getting close to her," I said. "What you did was notify me after the fact." He stood up and began pacing, running his hands through his hair the way he did when he felt cornered. "People grow apart," he said. "Feelings change. That doesn't make me a bad person." "I didn't say it did," I replied. "Your choices did." He stopped pacing and stared at me. "So that's it? 6 years? Gone? Because I had feelings for someone else?" I took a breath, steadying myself. "You didn't just have feelings," I said. "You acted on them. You invested time and emotional energy into someone who wasn't your wife." "They didn't even sleep together," he said, like that detail was supposed to save him. I waited. "They didn't even what?" I asked when he trailed off. He looked uncomfortable. "We connected emotionally." "While married to me," I said, which most people call cheating. "That's not fair," he snapped. "You're being incredibly rigid about this." Rigid, as if boundaries were flaws. He resumed pacing. "Relationships evolve. People can have meaningful connections with more than one person." I stared at him, incredulous. "Are you trying to sell me on polyamory right now?" "That's not what I'm saying," he said defensively. "I'm just saying love isn't always neat." "And marriage isn't always exciting," I said. "That's why people commit to it." He stopped pacing again. His phone buzzed on the table. The screen lit up. A woman's name. I didn't need to read it twice. "So she has a name," I said quietly. His face flushed. "Her name is Claire." Claire. There it was. Not an abstract concept anymore. Not a situationship. A person. "Tell me about Claire," I said, sitting down across from him. since she's apparently important enough to jeopardize our marriage. He hesitated, then spoke like he'd been waiting for permission. She's smart, easy to talk to. She listens. We talked for hours about everything: work, life, what we want in the future. When was the last time you tried to have one of those conversations with me? I asked. That's not the point, he said. It is exactly the point, I replied. You stopped showing up here and started showing up somewhere else. He clenched his jaw. I didn't mean to hurt you. I believe that, I said. But you did, and now you're trying to minimize it by calling it something softer. He glanced around the room, finally noticing the empty spaces where his things used to be. Did you pack everything? Everything that belongs to you, I said. I was careful. Where am I supposed to go? He asked, voice strained. I pulled out my phone and showed him a screenshot, a nearby hotel with extended stay availability. I checked for you, I said. They have openings. He stared at the screen like he didn't recognize me. You planned all this. One of us had to, I said. You were busy exploring. His phone buzzed again. He flipped it face down, too late. She's texting you, I observed, wondering how this conversation is going. It's private, he said sharply. So was our marriage, I said. Apparently privacy is flexible too. He picked up his phone and held it against his chest. You don't get to demand access to my messages. I'm not demanding, I said. I'm observing. He slumped back into the chair. I don't know what I want, he admitted. This is all confusing. It's not, I said calmly. You want her or you want your marriage. Those are the options. What if I end it, he asked. What if I tell Claire this was a mistake and we work on us? I studied his face carefully. He didn't mean it. You're saying that because you're scared, I said, not because you've chosen me. That's not true, he protested. Then why is she still texting you? I asked. His phone buzzed again, as if on cue. Silence stretched between us, thick and unforgiving. Finally, he turned the phone off and set it aside. There, he said. Is that better? I shook my head. Turning off your phone doesn't make her disappear. It just postpones the decision you don't want to make. He rubbed his temples. This is happening too fast. I need time. You had 3 days, I said quietly. 3 days of dinners and conversations and emotional intimacy. I got a phone call. He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. You're being cruel. No, I said. I'm being clear. And clarity, I was learning, felt brutal to people who relied on ambiguity to survive. After he said I was being cruel, something inside me finally gave way. Not anger, not tears. Just exhaustion. I sank into the chair across from him. The divorce papers between us, like a quiet third presence. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The house hummed softly, the refrigerator cycling, the faint tick of the clock on the wall. Ordinary sounds, continuing without regard for the fact that a 6-year marriage was coming apart at the seams. Daniel broke the silence first. I never thought it would come to this, he said, his voice low. I didn't think one mistake would end everything. One mistake? I repeated softly. He looked up, eyes red-rimmed now. I was confused. I felt disconnected, and then someone showed up who made me feel seen again. The words landed, heavy and sharp. So when you felt disconnected, I asked, your solution was to replace me? That's not what I said, he snapped. It's what you did, I said. He stood abruptly and walked to the window, mirroring the exact movement I'd made the night before. Outside, a woman across the street was watering her plants, humming to herself, living a life untouched by betrayal. The sight made my chest ache. This isn't fair, he said, his back to me. You're acting like I set out to hurt you. I don't think you planned to, I said quietly. I think you just didn't prioritize not hurting me. He turned. I still love you. I laughed then. Not loudly, not bitterly, just a small, broken sound that surprised both of us. You love me, I said, but not enough to protect our marriage when something more exciting came along. That's not... Stop, I said, holding up a hand. Please. I can't listen to the same explanation in different packaging anymore. He stared at me, frustration bleeding into desperation. So what now? You just erase me? Like I never mattered? The question hit harder than I expected, because the truth was, he had mattered. Deeply. Painfully. I had built years of my life around us. And now, in this moment, I felt the full weight of that loss crash down on me. My throat tightened. I didn't want this, I said, my voice finally cracking. I didn't wake up one day and decide I was done. I fought for us in ways you never even noticed. His expression faltered. I didn't know you felt like that. That's the problem, I said. You stopped knowing me. The room felt smaller then, the air heavier. I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly aware of how alone I was, sitting across from the man who was supposed to be my partner. This was my worst fear, I admitted. Not that you'd leave, but that you'd stay physically present while emotionally choosing someone else, and expect me to accept it. He swallowed hard. I never meant to make you feel replaceable. But I do, I said. And once that feeling is there, it doesn't just go away because you say you're sorry. Tears finally spilled down his face, silent, unguarded. I've ruined everything, he whispered. Yes, I said, you have. Saying it didn't feel powerful. It felt hollow, like acknowledging a truth that had already hollowed me out. For a moment, just a moment, I felt the urge to reach across the table, to comfort him, to make it easier. Old habits don't die quietly. But then I imagined the next conference, the next woman who made him feel seen, the next call explaining why our vows were flexible. And something inside me went cold. I can't do this anymore, I said, standing. My legs felt weak, but I forced myself upright. I can't be the woman who waits to see if she's chosen. He looked up at me, panic flashing across his face. Please, don't do this tonight. Let's sleep on it. Sleep. As if rest could undo betrayal. I've been awake for 2 nights already, I said. Thinking, deciding, mourning. I walked past him toward the hallway, then stopped. This, I said without turning around, is the lowest moment of my life, and I refuse to let it be the moment I abandon myself. Behind me, the house was silent except for his quiet breathing. I went into the bedroom and closed the door. On the other side, I slid down against it and finally cried. Not the explosive kind, but the deep, aching kind that comes from realizing something is truly over. And in that darkness, with my back against the door and my heart in pieces, I understood something clearly for the first time. This pain was the cost of choosing myself. And somehow, that made it survivable. I didn't know how long I sat on the bedroom floor. Time felt distorted in that strange way it does after something irreversible happens. My phone buzzed once somewhere in the distance, but I ignored it. For the first time since Daniel's call, I wasn't reacting to anything. I was listening, to my breath, to the quiet thud of my heart slowly steadying itself, to the silence that followed a truth finally spoken out loud. When I stood up, my legs were stiff, but my mind was clear. I washed my face in the bathroom sink and looked at my reflection. My eyes were red, my skin blotchy, but there was something else there too, resolve. The kind that comes not from anger, but from clarity, earned the hard way. When I walked back into the kitchen, Daniel was still there, sitting exactly where I'd left him. His shoulders slumped. His phone lay face down on the table like a guilty secret pretending to sleep. He looked up when he saw me. Hope flickered briefly across his face. That flicker told me everything I needed to know. He still believed there was room to negotiate. I've been thinking, he said quickly, standing. I'll end it, I swear. I'll call her right now if that's what you need. We can get counseling. Take a break from work. Whatever it takes. Whatever it takes, now. I held up a hand. Stop, I said calmly. My voice didn't shake this time. This isn't about what you're willing to do now that you're afraid of losing me. He frowned. Then what is it about? It's about the fact that you didn't choose me when choosing me actually mattered. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I walked over to the till and picked up his phone, not to read it, just to turn it so the screen faced him. Do you see this? I asked. This device has been lighting up all evening, even while you were asking me for another chance. He looked away. That, I said, is the answer. He rubbed his face with both hands. She texted because she was worried. Of course she was, I said. She thought she was starting something real with a married man who told her his wife would understand. His head snapped up. I never said that. You didn't have to, I replied. Your actions said it for you. That was the moment something in him shifted. Not defensiveness, not bargaining, recognition. I didn't think you'd actually leave, he said quietly. And there it was. The truth that had been hiding behind every softened word and modern label. You thought I'd wait, I said. You thought I'd stay available while you figured out whether something better existed. He sank back into the chair. I didn't mean to treat you like a backup plan. But you did, I said, and I won't live like one. The room felt different after that. Lighter, as if the truth had finally drained the tension out of the walls. I gathered the papers and slid them across the table toward him. These are real, I said. They're filed, and they're happening. He stared at them for a long time. So that's it, he said finally. Yes, I answered. It is. He looked up at me, eyes searching, almost pleading. I thought you'd fight harder. I felt a strange sadness then. Not for us, but for how little he'd understood me. I did fight, I said softly, just not in the way you expected. I walked him to the door. We carried the boxes together in silence. Not out of kindness, but because efficiency felt cleaner than cruelty. When the last box was loaded into his car, he turned to face me in the driveway. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now," I said. "You live with the choices you made, and I start living with mine." He nodded slowly, like someone absorbing a loss they hadn't believed was possible. As his car pulled away, I stood there until the taillights disappeared around the corner. Then I went inside. I locked the door. And for the first time since that phone call, I felt something unexpected rise in my chest. Not triumph, not revenge, peace. The days after Daniel left didn't arrive with drama. They arrived quietly. That surprised me more than anything. I woke up the next morning expecting to feel shattered, like I wouldn't be able to breathe, like the house would echo with absence. Instead, I felt something closer to emotional whiplash. My body kept waiting for tension that never came. No raised voices, no careful walking on eggshells, no wondering what mood he'd be in when he walked through the door. Just silence, and underneath that silence, a strange, unfamiliar calm. The legal process moved efficiently. Daniel didn't contest anything. He signed the paperwork without argument, without requests, without last-minute negotiations. At first, I thought that meant he was finally being respectful. Then the truth surfaced through other people. Melissa was the first to tell me. We were having coffee when she hesitated, fingers tightening around her cup. "I didn't want to bring this up," she said, "but people are talking." I raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "About him," she said carefully. "Apparently his coworkers know. Not just that you're divorcing, but why?" I didn't react, I just waited. She continued. "Turns out Claire wasn't exactly a secret. A lot of people at that conference noticed. The pictures, the comments, the fact that he was very much married." I let out a slow breath. "So the honesty tour didn't stop with me," I said. "No," Melissa said, "and it didn't land the way he probably hoped." Over the next week, the fallout spread in ways I hadn't anticipated and hadn't orchestrated. Daniel's mother called me once. Her voice was tight, controlled. "I heard what happened," she said. "I didn't raise my son to behave like this." It wasn't an apology, but it wasn't a defense either. "I'm sorry you were put in this position," she added after a pause. I thanked her. Nothing more needed to be said. Mutual friends stopped reaching out to me with awkward check-ins and started pulling away from him. Not dramatically, just quietly. Invitations slowed. Group chats went silent. People don't like being reminded that betrayal can wear polite language and still be betrayal. Daniel texted once, 2 weeks after he moved out. "I didn't think it would all fall apart like this." I stared at the message for a long time before replying. "It didn't fall apart," I typed. "You pulled it apart." He didn't respond. I later learned from someone who meant well but overshared that things with Claire hadn't gone the way he imagined. Once the secrecy was gone, so was the thrill. Once the marriage was officially ending, the dynamic shifted. Reality replaced fantasy. Apparently that was uncomfortable, but none of that was my concern anymore. I didn't celebrate his discomfort. I didn't feel satisfaction watching consequences arrive on his doorstep. What I felt was distance, emotional detachment, like watching a storm through a window after you've already moved to higher ground. The house changed too. I rearranged furniture, painted the walls a color I liked instead of the compromise we'd settled on years ago. I donated things we'd kept out of obligation. The space began to reflect me again, my rhythms, my preferences, my quiet. One afternoon, I found our wedding album while cleaning out a drawer. I opened it, looked, closed it. Then I put it back, not in anger, not in grief, but with acceptance. That chapter had existed. It mattered, and it was over. Daniel's life unraveled without my involvement. His reputation at work took a hit. His family stopped defending him. Friends grew distant. Not because I demanded loyalty, but because people draw their own conclusions when someone tries to redefine cheating with better vocabulary. I didn't gloat. I moved on. And that, I realized, was the most devastating consequence of all. 3 months later, I was sitting in Robert Hayes' office again. This time there were no notes, no questions, no uncertainty. Just the final documents. Robert slid the stamped divorce decree across the desk, the paper making a soft, definitive sound as it settled in front of me. "That's it," he said. "You're officially divorced." I picked it up, read my name, read Daniel's, and felt nothing dramatic. No rush of grief, no surge of victory. Just completion. "How does it feel?" Robert asked. I thought about it honestly. "Like something that should have happened earlier," I said, "and like I can finally breathe." The last 3 months had been the calmest I'd felt in years, not because life was suddenly perfect, but because it was honest. I wasn't explaining away someone else's behavior anymore. I wasn't shrinking myself to maintain peace. I poured that energy back into my own life. I started running again, early mornings when the city was still quiet. I learned how to cook properly instead of defaulting to takeout. I painted my living room a deep, warm color Daniel would have hated, and loved it. The house became mine in a way it hadn't been since before we married. I heard updates about Daniel through the social grapevine without seeking them out. His relationship with Claire had ended. Unsurprising. A connection built on betrayal rarely survives daylight. He struggled at work. He moved apartments. He told people the divorce was mutual. I didn't correct the record. One afternoon, I found an envelope in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a handwritten note. Daniel wrote that he knew he was probably the last person I wanted to hear from, that he and Claire had broken up, that losing me had forced him to confront parts of himself he'd avoided for years. He apologized for being selfish, for treating our marriage like something flexible when it required commitment. He said I deserved better. I read the letter once, then folded it and placed it in a drawer with old warranties and instruction manuals, things that had once mattered but no longer guided my life. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel tempted. I felt free. That evening, I called my mother. She'd been gentle throughout the process, careful not to push, careful not to mourn too loudly the future she'd imagined for me. She listened as I told her it was finally done. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "Better than I expected," I said. "Different than I planned, but better." She paused, then said something I still carry with me. "Don't let this make you cynical about love," she said. "What he did says more about him than it does about marriage." She was right. I wasn't cynical. I was discerning. 6 months earlier, I thought I was in a solid marriage. Today, I was a woman who had learned the difference between someone who loves you and someone who loves having you as an option. That lesson cost me 6 years, but it gave me my life back. That night, I opened a drink, chose a movie I'd always wanted to watch but never did because Daniel wasn't interested, and settled into my couch. My couch. Outside, a neighbor watered her plants. Normal life, unfolding in ordinary ways. The difference was this: I was no longer living in denial. I was living in truth, and that was enough.